Imprisoned without charge in Saudi Arabia. Dozens of political and free speech activists are held, provoking calls for the United Nations to suspend the kingdom from the Human Rights Council. That's only happened once before with Libya. Will the UN act again? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Two British lawyers have published a 31-page report outlining how Saudi Arabia has breached international law. The report accuses police of arresting dozens of political and free speech activists and holding them without charge. Now the United Nations is being urged to suspend Saudi Arabia from the Human Rights Council. The kingdom's seat on the council is due to expire next year, but the Saudi human rights record will be up for review in the next few months. Here's Sonia Gallego with more.
It's a case that has been given little attention given the recent state of affairs in Saudi Arabia. 30 of its citizens detained without charge, another 31 who have apparently simply disappeared. No one knows where they have gone or where they're being held, nor have they been charged with any offences. A violation of Saudi and international laws, say the British lawyers who authored the report into the arrests and are now calling for the UN to suspend the government of Saudi Arabia from the Human Rights Council.
If they are committed to human rights and the instruments that they signed up to, as well as international law, then there's no need for the suspension if they put that into practice. But those who breach provisions of international codes should not be allowed to do that and then still sit on a council that reviews human rights around the world. The double standards should be stopped.
Much may have been made of the recent changes in Saudi Arabia since the country's heir to the throne, Mohammed bin Salman, assumed a wider role. Women have won the right to drive, the last country in the world to have lifted that ban, and a high-profile corruption crackdown against members of the elite drew significant attention around the world. But human rights groups say while these actions are part of a determined effort to change Saudi's troubled image, the reality is far removed from that vision of change. Dissent is silenced, calls for change are censored, and even messages on social media can invite imprisonment and punishment.
The fact that multiple activists, at least 15 according to our counts, and maybe more now that this new report has emerged, are jailed solely for their human rights activism, and this is absolutely not acceptable. And the efforts of the Crown Prince to brand himself as a reformer cannot fly in the face of such blatant human rights violations.
As a member of the UN's Human Rights Panel, there is much pressure on Saudi Arabia to fulfill its duties in that capacity. One way would be to get key allies such as the UK, a major exporter of arms to the kingdom, to convince them to fulfill their legal obligations. Saudi's rulers are expected to visit Britain soon, but there are concerns as to how much of an effect Prime Minister Theresa May would have on calls to respect the values they're meant to uphold as members of the Human Rights Council. Saudi Arabia may be sensitive about its image. The question is, how much will it be prepared to prove that it's willing to accept change within the kingdom? Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
Let's bring in our panel now. And from London, Rodney Dixon, a British lawyer and the author of that report. From Washington, D.C., Ali Ahmed, who's the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs and also a former Saudi political prisoner. And from Beirut, Samah Hadid, human rights campaigner at Amnesty International. Very warm welcome to all of you. Rodney, let's first of all take a little bit of a closer look at the report that you produced. 30 people detained without charge since September. That's a large number. Do we know what they were detained for?
No, we don't. That's the problem that we've highlighted in the report that Lord MacDonald and myself have authored. We don't know the reasons for their detention. The government hasn't made those public. There are no arrest warrants. There are no proceedings before any courts. We can surmise, though, because of the activities that they have been involved in, such as being critical of the government, tweeting against Saudi policy, that it's because of their dissent and views that they have expressed raising question marks about Saudi foreign policy that they have been part of this crackdown.
Okay. Samah, even more chilling, perhaps, is the number of people who simply disappeared, 31 according to this report, again in the same time frame since September. I mean, is that a common practice in Saudi?
Most recently, as has been mentioned, we've looked really closely into the wave of arrests, arbitrary arrests and detention of activists, human rights defenders that were caught up in September of last year, just as the Crown Prince was appointed in his new role. And among those that have been arrested are leading human rights activists that are part of a local organization called ACPRA. It's a Saudi local NGO, and others including journalists and bloggers. And we also share this concern around this wave of arrests and detentions. Just a few days ago as well, we saw that the first human rights defenders were sentenced under the new leadership of Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed al-Utaibi and Abdullah al-Atawi were sentenced under the Specialized Criminal Court in Saudi Arabia simply for setting up a human rights organization. They were sentenced to up to 14 years for their human rights activities. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Countering Terrorism has shared this concern with Amnesty around how a court like this, that normally is set up to try cases of counterterrorism, has been trying and targeting human rights defenders. So for us, the concern goes beyond just the arbitrary arrests and detentions. It's also a concern around this expansion of counterterrorism laws that have been used to target peaceful activists and human rights defenders.
Okay, Ali, I want to bring you in here at this point, and I should point out that you're not here in any way to defend Saudi's human rights record, and I should point out to viewers that we did try all day to get that voice on, but to no avail. Ali, perhaps, though, you are able to give us some insight into why we're seeing this wave of arbitrary detentions and disappearances now.
The Saudi government has been always a human rights violator since its inception, dating back to even before the establishment of the kingdom. The Saudi rulers committed massive human rights abuses and crimes, including basically almost genocidal campaigns against local populations. It's very important to realize that, and I've been working on human rights since 1986, since I was in high school in that country. And before that, I was a political prisoner with my entire family. And I still have a brother and a nephew in prison who spent many years in prison. So I'm very familiar with the record. I think we need to really focus on the system, that the fact that the Saudi court system, there is no justice system. It's a court system that's not independent, it's not modern. You're talking about a government that is implementing apartheid policies against women, against Shia, and against blacks, racist policy against blacks and against other people. And of course, a lot of abuses and restrictions on religious freedom of all, including the majority Sunni population. So it's not about cases. In terms of 30 people arrested in September, before them thousands have been arrested, including Dr. Al-Qahtani and Dr. Al-Hamid, who are the founders of ACPRA, for example, in terms of creating death squad that has been murdering protesters in the eastern province, and including children. And that hasn't been talked about, including rape. Just now we found out that there's a case raping 4 Asian workers, expatriates in Awamiya by Saudi special forces, who have destroyed completely and used military-grade explosives and weapons to raise an entire quarter of a city.
So
I think
in terms of that,
there is
setting
no
the scene
question
as you
about
have
Saudi
there,
human rights record.
Okay, and so in terms of that, it has received a copy of this report by the 2 British lawyers. Is it going to pay any heed to it? What's the response likely to be?
I don't think you must realize, and I have a person who I think I'm the first Saudi national who went to the council in 2001 in terms of activists. This is a member state organization like any other United Nations organization, and it does not have any real power. It could make suggestions, it could make some statements, but that's the only thing that they can do. They don't have any real power. So, and there is no mechanism for them to expel anybody. I know Libya was suspended because the member states, the United States and the UK led that effort. Here we don't have that. So it's really, I admire, and I think this is a good effort, but I don't think it's going to bear fruit because the United States and the UK and other European countries will stop in the way, just like they did in terms of establishing a United Nations investigative team to look into crimes in Yemen, and they derailed it, and I think that the same result will be here.
Rodney, do you share that pessimism?
Well, we are in the report trying to highlight what happened in September and place that in the context of all of the previous arrests and the pattern of abuse that has been referred to. The focus is on September, but we're trying to show the wider picture in order to, as lawyers, assess the gravity and emphasize to states that it has certainly got to the point, if it hadn't done so before, of reaching a systemic level which now requires member states of the General Assembly to act. Of course, it is up to them whether they're going to do that, but we hope in providing this information it will give the impetus and it will show that in order to implement international law, yes, the Council can only make recommendations, there's no court, but international law is enforced through interstate relations, through their collective actions. And this is an opportunity to show that in practice now. It can be done behind the scenes, it can be done publicly, but we're saying it can't go on any longer. Otherwise, it tarnishes the UN and the whole international community to have a Human Rights Council where you have a member like Saudi Arabia, who's previously, in fact, been in the chair, showing complete flagrant disregard for the very human rights that the Council is there to uphold. So there is a chance now. There have been many chances missed, but we've got to try and seize this opportunity. Just because things haven't been done before doesn't mean we shouldn't push for them now. And keep doing that. Keep trying, because it could achieve results.
Okay, Rodney, I just want to pick up on one point there, because I believe that the UN Human Rights Council we spoke to them as well, they weren't able to come on the show, but they did make the point that Saudi hasn't actually ever been in the chair of the council itself, and they were quite keen to press that point. So let's just take a look at what the UN Human Rights Council actually is at this point. And it's a governing body looking to strengthen the promotion and protection of human rights around the world. Now, the council has 47 seats filled by member states elected for 3-year terms. The irony? Well, 10 members of the current council are accused of violating human rights. They are Burundi, Egypt, Rwanda, Cuba, Venezuela, China, India, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the Philippines. The alleged violations include extrajudicial killings, torture, sexual assault, arbitrary detention, and targeted travel bans. I mean, Samah, when you look at that list, you can see that Saudi is by no means alone here. Why do so many countries with questionable human rights records sit on this UN Council?
Well, unfortunately, I think mechanisms like the Human Rights Council and, where governments are members of this council, we see that human rights have taken a back seat, and there's a trade-off between political interests and human rights. And I think it's a moment for the UN to really look at how to better reform a mechanism like this, but also how to engage in other opportunities to put pressure on countries. And sticking to the subject of Saudi Arabia, there is an opportunity coming up at the Human Rights Council where Saudi Arabia as a country is up for universal periodic review. And this is where other countries can hold a country like Saudi Arabia to account on its human rights abuses and violations. And so we would urge these states to really take this opportunity as a meaningful opportunity to hold Saudi Arabia to account and really monitor and assess its human rights records.
Okay.
I think going beyond the UN,
let's just stop there for a moment, Samah. I just want to get Ali's response to that, because I can see he's shaking his head. He's at the Human Rights Council. Do you think this will be an opportunity that countries seize?
This is not the first UPR for Saudi Arabia, and the previous UPR. This is very typical, it's like a debating society. We urge this, Saudi Arabia, we admire, people, it will be political. The United States will praise the Saudi move and then will throw in soft words about encouraging and then, continuing and so on. In reality, the Council does not really play a role in terms of actually doing something. Like I said, I spoke myself in 2001, in April, to then the commissioner, Miss Robinson, Mary Robinson, who became the president of Ireland, and she was defending the Saudi government record on women. So really, these people who are working there as staff, they have no power. It is the power of the state. If the United States and other countries decided that Saudi Arabia is the bad actor, then they can take that to the UN Security Council. The crimes that's committed by not only by these 10, every member state, every government has human rights abuses. But of course, if you compare the Saudis to the United States, there is a huge difference. The problem is this council is really irrelevant in terms of actually doing something for human rights. And Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE and other governments who are abusing human rights are not going to change their behavior because of this council. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened to any government. So it's really, for me, my point of view is it's a waste of time.
Okay. Rodney, if we look at the state's role in all this, we can look to the UK, can't we? Because Mohammed bin Salman, the government is expected there very soon, a visit to Theresa May, the Prime Minister. Can we expect this issue to be raised? I presume that you're pushing for it to do so.
Yes, we're sending a copy of our report to the UK government and to other key governments who have been mentioned in the interviews already, and obviously to the UN Human Rights Council itself. I just wish to clarify that we have said in our report that Saudi Arabia were the chair of a key panel overseeing human rights, a very prominent position from 2015. But we've sent it to all those bodies because of these meetings that are coming up, because there is interaction at the highest level, at the state level. And at that level, yes, relationships are being talked about, economic deals are being talked about, but what we are saying in the report is that this state of affairs should also be on the agenda, that it can't be pushed aside, even though the Saudi government is trying to do that. Other governments shouldn't allow that to happen. And we're not saying that there shouldn't be any meetings and that all relations should be broken. No, quite the contrary. The good influence of those countries should be used in order to get Saudi Arabia to comply. And if there is a genuineness in this new air of reform, then it must be implemented. It can't just be rhetorical, is what we are highlighting in our report.
Some would say, though, that in all these situations, in all these state-to-state meetings, you would have a situation where oil would trump over human rights any day. Is that what Amnesty sees this position as being?
Well, not just oil, but arms sales as well. And I think there's an opportunity for countries like the UK and the US to really use its pressure and its bilateral relationship with Saudi Arabia to put pressure on the government there to improve its human rights record in the kingdom, but also to review its role in Yemen. So we're not just talking about human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, but also the Saudi-led coalitions of human rights abuses in Yemen. And here you have governments like the UK and US who can suspend their arms sales to the Saudi-led coalition because these arms have been used to commit crimes in Yemen. So I feel like there are opportunities for change. It's really up to these strategic countries to apply their pressure.
Ali, when the Crown Prince rose to power, Mohammed bin Salman, with his reform agenda, did you have any optimism? Did you hold any optimism that things would change, that your family members would be released from jail?
I don't think so. You know, this is an issue of a system, that you have an absolute monarchy that is, you know, running a system that is ingrained itself in legitimacy. It does not derive legitimacy from the people, from the religion. It's just by sheer power. And in order to maintain that system, that outdated system, it has to abuse people, and it has to use that basically terrorizing the population of all types of the population. And that's not going to change. We know in the West, the United States and the UK governments are always praising Saudi leaders as reformers, and that's the typical, because that's their interest in maintaining these people in power. And they are, in fact, a person who's been doing this for a long time, it is the support of the United States government and the UK government to the Saudi government that is the main source of human rights abuses. Because if they didn't have, they were not assured of support, they could not do what they do in terms of abusing their people, you know, across the board. So it's really, there is a relationship between the support that the Saudi government receives from the West, not only in terms of arms, but political and economic and intelligence support, and their abuse of their population. And that's the unfortunate reality. The Saudi government cannot change. It's not going to share power with its people unless the United States and the UK, specifically these two governments, change its position in terms of supporting and defending.
A situation, don't we, Ali, now where the US is a huge supporter of the Saudi government. Do you see the situation then getting worse?
I believe so. In 2008, I confronted then the director of the assistant director of the FBI, Philip Mudd, and he told me in the conference that yes, we support the Saudi government against human rights activists. This is the FBI, CIA guy who is CIA and FBI. He admitted this to me, that they don't support them against only so-called militant, but also against human rights advocates and democracy advocates, because that's the perfect system for the United States government, to have a government based on one family that controls everything.
Okay, just lastly, Rodney, the families of the detained and the missing who commissioned the report that you did, are they expecting to get any answers? Should they expect to get any answers?
Well, that is what they are hoping for. That's why certain of the families who want to remain anonymous wanted to get this information out there. And as lawyers, what we wanted to do was to get the evidence, the hard facts, because then you're not just talking about speculation or rumor. If that can be shown to exist, to be proved, then governments have to take it seriously. They can't ignore it. And through this process, the families, friends, relatives, others are hoping that their plight, together with obviously many others, will be raised based on real evidence, and to challenge those in authority to take that seriously, as they do in any other case, in any other criminal case. It can't be brushed aside. There has to be a proper investigation and a determination to end these crimes.
Okay, very interesting indeed to speak to all of you. Thank you for joining us here on Inside Story. Rodney Dixon, Samah Hadid and Ali Ahmed. And thank you too very much for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.